Hello, everyone. So, today I wanted to talk about a specific topic, which is being raised in a narcissistic household where one or both of your parents may have been narcissists or otherwise very toxic people, and how you can use that experience of being raised in this narcissistic environment, this neglecting, potentially even abusive environment, to your advantage later in life. Um, by the way, this topic was suggested to me by an online friend. I won't mention her name to keep her anonymous, but her initial, the initial of her first name is D. D as in diamond, not because she likes diamonds. Well, she might like diamonds. I've never asked the question, but thank you, D, for suggesting this topic, and I'm hoping some of you can get something positive out of this, can relate to some of the points that I'm going to go through. So, being raised in a narcissistic household, experiencing that trauma as you develop through your infancy and childhood. The term trigger, being triggered, is not something you probably would have known as a kid. But what would have happened throughout your upbringing is, you would have been either neglected in certain ways, put down in certain ways, used in certain ways that would have just made you feel, over time, feel very bad. Maybe you lack certain confidence in certain areas off the back of that. Maybe you have certain insecurities or abandonment issues off the back of that. Things like neglect can trigger those issues in people. And then once you've had these problems kind of develop as you've grown, whoever would have caused those issues in you would have constantly triggered those issues in you as you would have grown up because they were just being who they were. Maybe you were being ignored. Maybe your accomplishments were being underplayed. Maybe, some people just didn't have the bandwidth to care about you. And when you're thinking about your caregivers, they're the people who should care about you. So over time, you get certain types of, you feel certain types of trauma. You develop certain issues that sometimes you don't really fully become aware of until you're well into adulthood. So these things, once you learn a little bit about NPD, once you learn about yourself, once you learn about the ways that you were affected, the ways you were traumatized by your upbringing, you can see that in other people. And what I mean by that is, you would have been triggered a lot in certain ways growing up. And once you've moved out of your house, or once you're away from that person or not dependent on them, the person who would have abused you, your caregiver, once you're distant from them, you have the chance to either keep that type of toxicity out of your life, or because it's familiar, you might find yourself inviting it back in again and again. If you're a self-conscious person, you can see when certain people might be triggering you in a negative way early on, because you would have recognized that as something that resembles your earlier experiences. Once you've been acquainted with a few very toxic people, you learn to spot others more quickly. So one thing that you can do to use that experience to your advantage is, with some knowledge and self-reflection, you can spot people more quickly. People who are more likely to use and abuse you versus people who are more likely to be healthy people for you. And just having that knowledge, that ability to make that distinction is it can be a very powerful thing. But there is a big caveat to that. Sometimes we still find ourselves attracted to the very people who are likely to abuse us because of the familiarity to the people who were our caregivers, our parents, or maybe we're trying to fix our past through these new people. But even though we might have these inclinations to attract certain toxic people because it's somehow connected to our upbringing, you do have the chance to consciously make a judgment call, which is, okay, I see what's happening here. Am I going to go with the flow that I know is going to make me feel bad, maybe cause me a lot of harm? Or am I consciously going to try to keep working on myself, so I'm not going to let this attraction, this person destroy me because they remind me of my parents. Should I let them in my life to do what they want? So that can be quite tricky, because you're trying to consciously override your instincts in some ways, and it's not always easy to do that. But something else. So that's just an awareness thing, and you can tell when people trigger you, and you have a certain sensitivity with those types of people. There's something else which is just more general. When you grow up in a narcissistic household, when you've experienced abuse, or just having a narcissist be the person who is responsible for your growth and development, a lot would have happened that would have made you very sensitive in many ways. You would have become very sensitive to people's feelings. You would have become very sensitive in a sense that you tend to know what people are thinking, what people are likely going to do. Because when you grow up in a narcissistic household, you're subconsciously trying to look out for dangers. When you should avoid certain people, how you should, any mitigating actions you should take not to be hurt, usually emotionally, but sometimes even physically, by the people you live with. This upbringing causes you to have this level of sensitivity that most people don't have. So you are going to be more sensitive than most people. Then the question is, how do you apply that? Being ultra sensitive can be a very good thing or a very bad thing, depending on how you apply it. And what I mean by that is, if you're an emotionally sensitive person who just tries to take on the problems of everyone else in the world, then you're going to suffer a lot, because you're going to be absorbing a lot of negative energy, and a lot of negative toxic people are going to be flocking to you because they see that you have that ability to connect with them on an emotional level, where you're kind of helping them feel better about their problems, almost like you're healing them in a way. But it can be very burdensome to the person who's very sensitive. But so that's an example of how being very sensitive can be a bad thing. But being very sensitive can also be a good thing. So if you think about work, for example, you're always dealing with people, maybe dealing with clients, work colleagues. If you're a very sensitive person, you can typically tell, let's say people you work with, you can typically tell just through your intuition when somebody's not feeling great, they're not in a good mood, so you know when to avoid them. Because sometimes if you want to have an important conversation with somebody, it's all about timing. And when you're very sensitive and you're smart about it, you can make smart decisions on your timing. Right time, right place. So you can leverage in terms of engaging with people, communicating with people when you know they're going to be more receptive to what you want to say. And that can be a very important thing, to have healthy relationships with people, or even getting what you want. Work is a good example, but it can be in other areas of life. Also, if you're thinking about, for example, work and maybe your clients, or even friends and people, just people you have any type of relationship with, when you're sensitive, you understand their needs better. And if there's somebody you want to help, it can be a friend, a spouse, a client. If you're sensitive to their needs and wants, you can help them in a more targeted and productive way, which can be beneficial in many arenas of your life. So as you can see, this ultra sensitivity, that is a feature of many people who come from abusive households or narcissistic households. It can be a good or a bad thing, depending on how you apply it. If you're predominantly being emotionally overburdened by people because of your sensitivity, that's not a very good thing. Then you need to roughen up your skin in some ways, toughen up a bit, kind of put those emotional barriers. But if you're not feeling emotionally overburdened by people, but you are able to apply that sensitivity in ways where you can listen to people better, you have better timing and better better placing and better timing on your actions. If you become a better listener to certain people who you want to hear out and then give advice to, you can be an amazingly good person at doing those things. So that, do do be mindful of your level of sensitivity and how and whether that's working for you or against you. The final point on this topic that I wanted to touch on is around your not emotional, but just your blind spots. The spots where people maybe can come into your life and almost have their way with you. But at first you might think they have wholesome intent, but they end up actually not being healthy people for you. So how do you combat these blind spots? My view is people can only take advantage of you through your blind spots if they know your vulnerabilities better than you do. Think about it. What are your blind spots? People are preying through your vulnerabilities to have their way with you. They're being able to manipulate you because they know your entry points. And they can only succeed at that. People can only succeed in working through your blind spots if they know your entry points better than you do. And your entry points are typically your vulnerabilities, insecurities, any form of trauma that's not healed. Learn to identify your unhealed trauma and keep working on it. If people know what your softest, most vulnerable part of you is, maybe you need validation from people, they will tactfully use that against you. If people know you have abandonment issues, they will tactfully use that against you. If they know that you have any other type of unhealed trauma, they'll play that against you. So I could do a whole video just on identifying some of those vulnerabilities and how manipulators use them against you. But to keep it high level and to keep it concise, if people are working their way into your life and taking advantage of you, maybe they're somehow taking more than they're giving, but they're doing it in a way where you almost don't see it happening until it's too late and you feel the sting of it, it's probably because they know your vulnerabilities better than you do. So it's just a matter of you accepting the parts in you that you have to work on. Don't neglect, don't refuse to see your own shortcomings, because we all have shortcomings. When we refuse to see our shortcomings and we don't work on them, then you could be inviting other people to take advantage of them. But if you do see your shortcomings and you are working on them, then it's that much harder for anybody to take advantage of you. So, all in all, being raised in a narcissistic household, experiencing that kind of environment, growing up, you would have developed certain traits, certain ways about yourself. Things like ultra sensitivity, certain unhealed traumas. It's just about acknowledging it and reflecting in the right way and just using things like your sensitivity to your advantage and understanding your vulnerabilities sufficiently well that people can't take advantage of those things. And you can actually find yourself living a very fulfilling, very productive life. No one ever said that being raised in a narcissistic household means that you're going to be held back in life in any way. Absolutely not. You can actually use some of those things almost like a superpower if you know how to harness it. So just be mindful of those things. Be positive, and you can use a lot of those things to your advantage. And of course, your life can be very good.